This time, we're talking about what happens inside your heart when someone you help starts to pull away. Let's get into it. You poured so much into supporting that person, and yet somewhere along the way, they started keeping their distance. Has that ever happened to you? You help someone grow, you watch them find their footing, and then the moment they start walking on their own, the relationship quietly fades. That reality is not something you can simply write off as being betrayed. Still, that feeling of, after everything I did for them, lingering somewhere in your chest is proof that you showed up with your whole heart. In this video, we're going to take an honest look at the psychology behind why people drift away after being helped, and the complicated emotions that live inside that kind of relationship. Whenever someone receives deep support from another person, a sense of above and below almost always forms between them. The one doing the helping brings experience, knowledge, and direction. The one being helped is still finding their way, protected and guided. As that dynamic continues, something quietly accumulates in the heart of the person being supported. A kind of heaviness. It is not that their gratitude disappears, and it is not that they stop caring about the other person. What happens is that as they grow, a feeling starts to emerge. A feeling that says, if I stay here, I will always be the weaker one. Once a person's sense of self reaches a certain point, they begin to pull away from the very place that once protected them. It mirrors the way a child eventually leaves their parents' home. It is almost instinctual, so even if it feels deeply unfair to the one who gave so much, for the other person, that distance may have been something they needed in order to move forward. You receive a quiet thank you from the person you supported, and then the relationship slowly fades to silence. That silence holds more than one thing inside it. One layer is this: the moment someone puts their gratitude into words, something in them feels settled. Like an account has been closed. There is no ill intent behind it, but thank you can become, without anyone meaning it to, the sound of an ending. The other layer is a desire to build new relationships that match who they have become. Once they step into the wider world and start forming new connections, the distance between them and someone who knew their older self begins to shift. In front of the person who witnessed their weakness, their inexperience, there is a pull back toward who they used to be. It is not that their respect or warmth toward the person who supported them has gone. It is that they are quietly, almost unconsciously, choosing relationships that fit where they are now. You gave your time, your emotions, your energy. And yet when things were going well for them, the messages stopped. And when something went wrong, they came back. That cycle, repeated enough times, is where genuine anger begins to take shape. The certainty that you still have more to offer, that you can still see further than they can, only deepens the feeling of being left behind. That reaction is not a sign of weakness. It is what naturally surfaces in someone who was fully, honestly present. But when that anger starts moving in the direction of waiting for them to fail, it is worth pausing, just for a moment. Because that feeling may not really be about the other person at all. It may be the shape that pain takes, pain that came from giving everything and not having it truly received. There is real truth in the feeling that no one else would have been as caring as you were. What you offered may genuinely have been something rare. The world is not always kind, and people who show up with that level of sincerity are not easy to find. So the hurt of watching someone leave without ever fully recognizing that is completely real. But the stronger that feeling of, I was the only one who truly cared, becomes, the more it reveals something worth looking at. Was it purely for the other person? Or somewhere inside, was there also a need to feel thanked, to feel depended on, to feel needed? Neither answer is wrong. Human emotions are layered by nature. When something does not go the way that person hoped, the thought of, I knew it, can rise up. That is not cruelty. It is the desire to have your judgment confirmed, to prove to yourself that you were right. When you have seen enough of how the world actually works, watching someone move forward with an overly optimistic view of things can feel both worrying and quietly maddening. That feeling runs especially deep in people who carry years of real experience. But if you find yourself waiting for their failure with a sense of satisfaction ready to go, that emotion will eventually turn back on you. Enjoying someone else's collapse does nothing to ease the ache that was already there. Facing the question of what you were truly looking for in the first place is what actually moves you forward. When the thought arises of saying something harsh if they ever come to you again, what is usually sitting beneath that thought, before the anger, is a wound. The more fully you gave yourself to that relationship, the more sharply the sense of being dismissed tends to cut. That is simply how it works. But the impulse to hurt the other person with hard words is itself a sign that the wound has not healed. The mechanism of easing your own pain by causing pain in someone else is something that exists in all of us. So before reaching for those sharp words, taking a quiet moment to ask, what was it that actually hurt me, tends to bring more relief than the words themselves ever would. Try giving the feeling a name before letting it become an action. I felt lonely. I felt dismissed. I gave everything and it never reached them. When you turn those words inward, the urge to act on the emotion has a way of quietly settling. There are people who never recognize the support they received. And there are those who recognize it but cannot bring themselves to respond. Both kinds exist. Some of that comes down to who the person is, and some of it comes down to how the relationship itself was structured. When support and dependence go on long enough, the person being supported begins to experience that care is simply the way things are. People tend not to notice the value of what has always been there. The way no one stops to feel grateful for the air they breathe each day, a steady and constant source of support can come to feel like it just exists, without any effort behind it. Knowing that may take some of the edge off the anger, though that is not the same as saying you should forgive. The anger is valid. The question is only where to direct it, and turning it toward your own life tends to be what actually enriches you. When you support someone, you are the one who decides how much of yourself to bring. If you want to give everything, you take on the reality that they may leave, as part of the deal. And if you still feel it is worth it, then give everything. But if the thought of no longer being thanked is something that wears you down, shifting toward a way of supporting that keeps a little more distance is also a way of protecting yourself. That is a legitimate choice. There is no right answer here. The more useful measure is how you can stay involved without depleting yourself. That is what tends to be sustainable over time. If supporting others has left you exhausted, that is probably not a sign to stop entirely. It may simply mean that your own recovery needs to come first. Being pulled away from after you help someone carries a complexity that cannot be summed up as simple betrayal. Both the other person's psychology and your own emotions hold layers that take time to untangle. The anger and the hurt are real. They are evidence of how genuinely you showed up. There is no reason to push those feelings away. But rather than using them as something to aim at someone else, receiving them as part of your own story is what tends to make the next relationship a little easier to build.